Since Luton Town took to Wembley for the cup final in 1959, they had done typical Luton Town things, from Division 1 to 4 and back to the top flight for a single season. Then David Pleat picked them up and engineered the Kenilworth Road glory days. We've got a lot of Luton history to speed through. Here goes. September 1880, football comes to Luton in the form of Luton Wanderers. 5 years later, Luton Town is formed and they play their football at Dallow Lane. In 1896, they finally take the plunge, resigning from the Southern League to apply for the second division. The Football League elects Blackpool, Walsall and Gainsborough Trinity instead, a sign of things to come for the young club. After bouncing between the United League and Southern League, finally Luton venture into the promised land known as the Football League and the third division in 1920. For the first time, they ditch the light blue and move into their now familiar black and white. Between wars, like many, Luton lived hand to mouth, essentially underpinning the club's finances on boxing and wrestling tournaments. But finally, in 1933, they got their unsporting merit, appearing in the FA Cup quarter-final, eventually knocked out by the team of their day, Dixie Dean's Everton. An easier way to make money was realised 2 years later when Luton flogged the family silver, recouping almost £5,000 for star players Bill Brown and Sam Bell. Safe to say the supporters preferred the cup run method of raising money. After dwelling in the third division south for 17 years like some kind of sweaty goblin, Luton finally earned promotion with a win over Torquay United on May the 1st, 1937. Modern day supporters of the club would be surprised to learn that the club then spent another 18 years in Division 2. These periods of stable generations in the same division would not last long. By 1955 they were in the top flight, and within 3 years they were in the top end of the first division, a record finish of 8th, almost a disappointment after a late season collapse. The following year, however, would be Luton Town's first day in the footballing sun.
And there was something new to watch before the match. Keep Fit girls from Coventry giving a demonstration on how to keep fit. This year's cup final was honoured by the presence of Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip. Wing to put in a beautiful centre, and Roy Dwight's kick was a crackerjack. Did again. A centre from Billy Gray, and slow motion shows how Tom Wilson used his head to beat Roy Bainman. Then the ball came to David Pacey, who scored. The Hatters, of course, went mad. And the rest of the match was packed with thrills.
Luton Town had their day out at Wembley. Their talisman Sid Owen had just won the Footballer of the Year award. Sky was the limit, right? Wrong. They had a bunch of old lads that they just could not replenish. Case in point, Sid Owen retired after that cup final. By 1965, Luton were in the 4th division. By 74, they were back in the 1st division. So you see, this Luton Town disease really isn't a new phenomenon. They pogo stick their way up and down the English pyramid with enough force to give Buzz Lightyear vertigo, all the while they attempted to leave Kenilworth Road. Again, not new phenomena. I haven't really mentioned any players so far, but it's best to break from that to pay respect for the 1964 acquisition of David Pleat from Nottingham Forest. He'd played less than 100 games for the club before pottering around provincial clubs before returning to the coaching staff in 74, by which point the club was in the top flight once again.
That was Smith. Getting down there into a marvellous position and a powerful cross for Hankins to get up there. It's not the simplest of goals in.
No, you're right, it was not going well at all for them. Before their final game prior to Christmas, the club had only 9 points from 21 outings to rub together. A record almost bad enough to make this modern world of parachute payments blush. And yet 10 wins from their second half of the season left the greatest of the great escapes on. With their season over, they were out of the drop zone, but the danger was not over yet. Many Luton fans turned up in their droves to White Hart Lane in the hope that relegation rival Spurs would lose at home to Leeds. They didn't, and Luton were down. It was only the work of manager Harry Haslam that kept Luton from leaning on the old familiar pogo sticking up and down the divisions like some kind of deranged mutant rabbit. Faced with managing a club that had just announced debts of 343 grand, he stripped the club back to its fundamentals and still he managed to steer the club to 2 top 7 finishes. By January 1978, however, he announced his departure. Few could blame him for all the work he had done, first in getting the club to the top flight and, more importantly, keeping the club's head above water after their inevitable relegation. The question now, was the next manager up to it? Seeing that name flash up before you on your dirty little screen, you probably already know the answer. Within 4 years, David Pleat had gained back-to-back promotions, from reserve team coach to chief coach, and now he was the manager. You could say that made him perfect for the Mad Hatters. Having turned just 32, he had a whole dressing room to win over, many of which were older than him. Ultimately, under his watch, he took the club from 7th to 13th as the best placed of 7 teams on 38 points, meaning it wasn't all that safe a season as the positioning says. Tough decisions needed to be made. That included selling the Futcher brothers for a combined £450,000, and that created an almost new team from scratch. The highlight of this new team comfortably being the £15,000 signing of Mal Donaghy from Northern Ireland. Whilst Luton regressed by just 2 points and finished closer in position to the drop zone in their 1978-79 campaign, they were somehow further away from the relegation points-wise, quirkily with a positive goal difference which showed just how Jekyll and Hyde they were on their travels compared to at home. They had survival as well as a run to the League Cup quarter-final to show for the season, as David Pleat repeated the promise that the club would need 3 years to be stabilised. We were just about to enter that 3rd year. Armed with a new managing director, John Smith, the club became more ambitious on other fronts, being one of the first to welcome a new dawn of shirt sponsorship ahead of the 1979-80 season. Oh, and the players came in by the bucket load. 200 grand spaffed on Mansfield Mike Saxby, 150 grand via tribunal for Orient's Tony Grealish. It was an incredible start to the season that bled well into the 1980s.
Monster kick, a tricky one.
That latest win had Luton Town entering the official threshold of business end of the season, within the promotion spots and even with a game in hand that could take them top. Now 20,000 were being pulled into Kenilworth Road thanks to the entertaining and successful football. Once the heat arrived, Luton melted. Away from home, they could no longer find a win, going down to defeats at Sunderland and Swansea, while struggling in front of their own fans, being held to points against West Ham and Burnley. They wouldn't win a game between February 16th and April 4th, with promotion now in the toilet. The difference was just 4 points and 3 places, their 16 wins comfortably the lowest of the top 7, as they recorded fewer defeats than the promoted Birmingham City. The summer of 1980 was a less dramatic one by Luton's transfer standards, Radi Antic coming in, whilst their biggest expenditure came in the form of attaining a safety certificate at 200 grand. Unlike the prior campaign, this one began slowly and then ramped up into the new year. Before David Pleat and his men pitched up at Cambridge, Luton were squelching about dangerously close to the West Country Deadmen which propped up the division. By the time fireworks went off signifying the arrival of 1981, Luton were just a win away from the promised promotion that a top 3 spot would deliver. Unfortunately, the difference between promotion and another year in Div 2 was the needlessly bad home form that generated just 2 home victories before April. Still, 2 points was the difference and Luton were getting warmer to the fires of the First Division. Pleat was brave in the market that summer, selling local boy Paul Price to Spurs for $250,000 and daringly swapping Tony Grealish for the ageing Brian Horton. It was supposed to be a mistake. In the end, he clicked everything into gear. With Horton placed as a midfield fulcrum, it freed up Ricky Hill to venture further up the field alongside Brian Steen. Safe in the knowledge of a now adept fullback pairing of Kirk Stevens and Mark Hazelwood, as well as Jake Findlay between the sticks, Luton were ready for a promotion assault.
Looking for the one long pass that can go forward, and here's another one for White, who's onside and scores. White puts
There's flying out the blocks, and then there's whatever Luton were doing at the start of the 81-82 campaign. Charlton battered at home on the opening weekend. QPR and Bolton sworn off to start September. A win at Leicester, both Watford and Orient pulverised before 6 of the best at home to Grimsby Town. By the time the club lost its third league game of the season on November the 21st, they commanded an 8-point lead over 4th place. Even now, in a world of 3 points for a win, it was a comprehensive stranglehold over the division. The one low point thus far was the premature end to Mike Saxby's playing career, his knee buckling in a 1-0 win on Halloween at home to Crystal Palace. His replacement would be nurtured through the system, not bought, and that man's name was Clive Goodyear. Ultimately, the loss up at Newcastle United turned out to be a mere blip, as Luton lost only once more in the league all season, a typically madcap 4-3 defeat in Yorkshire against Barnsley.
Andy Smith to Cartwright. Oh, it's a bad one. Straight to Turner. Oh, beaten by Goodyear. Here comes Luton again. Ankic. To Hill. That's a good cross towards Keane.
The season wasn't even allowed to enter May in the final 4 fixtures, and Luton were a win away from the big time. Top met second bottom, the result a mere formality as the Hatters swept 4 beyond Shrewsbury Town to earn promotion after 7 seasons. David Pleat had to be brave in the transfer market, and that meant the tough decision of including his top scorer Steve White in a deal with Charlton Athletic for their heavily coveted signature of Paul Walsh. The new young forward more than settled into the team, as Luton's brand of swashbuckling football only intensified with the increase in the opposition's quality.
You're going again, but that was Goodyear. And Steen is in the clear. Against Grobler, he's round him. And Alan Kennedy can't keep it out.
The turn from Hill. Finds Steen again. Still Steen. Well, would you credit him?
It was football from a different planet, not impeccably entertaining and perfect like a Dutch total football or an early Pep Guardiola team, but just simply put, mad. A 3-2 win at Birmingham in October placed Luton into the dizzying heights of 8th, 7 points off the pace. It was a peak, as the honeymoon soon went off the rails. With a mix of the novelty being snuffed out, Brian Steen breaking his foot, and the cruel marathon of quality opposition every week, the only 4s and 5s being scored were against Pleat's team now. The latest of which, suffered at Vicarage Road against Watford, placed the Hatters within the drop zone alongside 2 other teams on 34 points. After 4 straight defeats, relegation now appeared inevitable. Then the fight back. Unbeaten in 6, Pleat's side took 12 points with victory over both second city teams and at home to Swansea before digging in on the road against Notts County and Southampton. Going down to Everton and Manchester City, however, plucked them from their seemingly safe place of 17th and swallowed them down into the relegation zone. A point behind both Birmingham and Manchester City, it was the latter who they travelled up to meet on May 14th for a relegation shootout. Only a win would do.
And Steen again. And he gets the cross in. And Williams has come. Antish! Oh, it's there! They've done it! Freddie Antish!
Luton, a team that had gone from Division 1 to 4 and back up to 1 in 23 years, whilst Manchester City enjoyed a golden age of cups and a league title, and they had relegated their opponents. Then, seemingly with all the goodwill in the world, it would not be Luton Town without a spanner chucked into the works. That summer, after such an incredible feel-good season, the club made inquiries about ripping the club out of Luton and taking it to Milton Keynes. After an intense summer of relocation, redevelopment and ownership buyout, a sigh of relief could be heard when Luton ran out onto the Highbury turf to start the new season. Only Les Sealey had been acquired, taking over from Jake Findlay in net, not that the low turnover in playing staff appeared to matter. After Leicester had fallen, Wolves were slapped by Fort Wolves, a team who had graced Wembley not that long ago. Then the more impressive of victories, 1-0 against Villa, which we've just shown you, which was quickly followed by triumphs over Everton and Southampton, some of the finest teams of their day. A 6-0 loss at Anfield came next, but the true barometer of just how Luton had improved was their resilience, rebounding from that with a gritty 1-0 win at QPR, which put Pleat's side within the top 4 on bonfire night. By Boxing Day and after rattling off 4 wins from 5, Luton was still in the mix, with teams like Liverpool and Man United sitting third with 19 matches played. It was truly fairy tale stuff. Then the 1984 reality check, long-term injuries mixed with a rotten bit of form served to pluck Luton from the moon and push them down into the dirt. The club had won just 16 points from their final 23 matches, plummeting them down into 16th. David Pleat could be forgiven for taking the tantalising opportunity of the Aston Villa job that summer, but he dug his heels in. Luton were to go again.
Put Luton into the lead inside 4 minutes.
Luton's first goal was nicely worked. Brian Steen's dummy, and then Mick Harford turned the ball back for Steen to take in his stride.
But it was never going to be a quiet season, not with Luton Town. First off, Pleat drove the club away from an impending financial crisis by wringing $750,000 out of Liverpool for Paul Walsh. Radiantich and Brian Horton were out, and incomings were only ratified after a boardroom overhaul and a more generous overdraft. It allowed a quartet to come through: Villa's Steve Foster, Peter Nicholas from Crystal Palace, and Walsall's David Pleat, before finally Mick Harford from Birmingham. But the biggest celebration was the fact Milton Keynes Borough Council had finally dropped the idea of needing a football club. Luton would not be the victims of the relocation. The season on the actual pitch started off strong. Little did anybody know that Stoke City's rolling over was something they'd do 31 whole times in the league as part of one of English football's worst ever seasons. With all the upheaval around the club, it was a wonder that Luton weren't joining them. Instead, they were in a relegation scrap a little closer to safety alongside Sunderland, Ipswich and Coventry. Still, they had an FA Cup run to shout about. Stoke undone after 2 games in the 3rd round, Huddersfield immediately in the 4th before 3 games were required to pass by Watford and into the quarter-finals. But I should remind you that this is Luton Town Football Club. Nothing was ever quiet. Their quarter-final at home against Millwall would be the thing everybody would remember from Luton this season.
Some of the travelling so-called Millwall supporters invaded the pitch, and indeed seats were broken and thrown onto the playing area. Very swift decision. He's going to take the teams off, just as the referee had to do in Millwall's last FA Cup quarter-final. Fans who had spilled over began to get onto the playing area. George Graham and Mr. Theo Foley have been in consultation with the police on the pitch. I think that's a challenge. There's a spot of trouble as well there, and overspill again on the side of the pitch. Again, and the referee has blown, and Luton Town are through to the FA Cup semi-finals for the first time in more than a quarter of a century. Steen the hero, Foster waved, but it's unfortunate in a way that the players have had to go so quickly, but absolutely right that they should. David Hutchins twists them off, because this unfortunate, ugly background which these people have caused to spoil this 6th round tie in many ways was something we could have done without. Say that in a week when the Chelsea crowd trouble is going to be investigated by the Football Association, there's another major inquiry needed here, and something, as we said before, sooner or later has got to be done to try to prevent people like this spoiling the football for others.
For all the wrong reasons. The first landmark in what was a stain of a year for English football as a rare televisual experience was reserved for an afternoon of violence. Getting back to the football, Luton were edging closer to retaining their top flight status, losing only once between New Year's Day and their progression to the semi-final against Everton. All eyes were pointed towards Villa Park, not for when the Hatters sealed their survival 5 games out from the end of the season, but for Town's first FA Cup semi-final since they reached the final in '59.
Harford's there, and here's Hill. Ricky Hill, beautifully taken. He drove one, it's there. Sheedy curls it, Mountfield's there, it's a goal.
Unfortunately, this was an Everton team that were gunning for a treble, and their resolve was far stronger than David Pleat's sides. That summer ever eventful, given that this is the world according to Luton Town, as the club sprung for an artificial surface for the price of a potentially world-class footballer. As the rest of the world balked, the club intended to pocket the proceeds from year-round rentals of their stadium. And whatever might be said of its advantages for the home side, Luton actually already had a good home record, placing themselves 8th in the prior season. Whilst that would climb to 6th for the 1985-86 campaign, they had only won one more point with the artificial surface than without it. The actual difference was in their away form, picking up 11 more points on the road compared to the prior season. Sadly, much of the season was lost to a television blackout as suits argued with each other over money and the masses were starved of their football. Either way, Luton ascended to a top half position, their most enjoyable day coming in October in a 7-0 thrashing over Southampton. Away from home though, fantastic victories at dangerous sides like Spurs, Watford, Southampton and surprise title challengers West Ham United. Naturally, this upturn in success was dangerous for a small club back then, just as it is now. Paul Elliott had returned from a broken leg and his form demanded a £400,000 fee from Aston Villa. Pocketing most of that, David Pleat brought in Wigan's Mike Newell for £85,000. And whilst Everton had Luton's number in the FA Cup again, this time in the quarter-final, they plotted their revenge 10 days later at Kenilworth Road, denying them in a 2-1 win. 13 days after another satisfying season was over, reality hit home. David Pleat was gone, coaxed to the capital with the promise of the Spurs manager's job.
Then found its way to Newell as a Liverpudlian chasing the Merseyside-dominated Championship race.
Any fears that Luton would just die without the David Pleat effect were greatly overestimated. John Moore was promoted internally much like Pleat, and he had taken Town to the record-breaking, dizzying heights of 7th place. They didn't even need Mick Harford, who was routinely out on the treatment table. Not to worry, Mike Newell, or we've got Mick Harford at home, more than filled his void as the club whipped Liverpool not just once but twice by 3 goals, first in the league and then in the cup. Of course, that being Luton, it wasn't the whole story. They had banned away fans after the Millwall riots, and that had earned them a disqualification from the League Cup for the 86-87 campaign. Arguably the greatest thing Moore did in what turned out to be a rather fleeting 12 months at the club before his shock resignation was in the hiring of Ray Harford, no relation, as assistant manager, whilst Jim Ryan came in as coach. Naturally, the managerial pipeline at Kenilworth Road was assured well into the 90s and the Premier League age, and judging by form, Luton were well placed to be First Division furniture by the time that league came into existence.
Harford waited in quickly there. So well, Breaker with the cross. Harford. Now it falls to McDonough. Yes!
Once the players got their way and their natural 4-4-2 game was allowed to return under the new manager, Luton flourished. They entered November in the bottom 5, but after sinking the likes of Newcastle, Wednesday Spurs, Watford, Charlton and on New Year's Day, Chelsea, they strode into 88 in 8th place. And not only that, they had a profitable quarter-final in the League Cup upon their return to the competition. Little old Bradford City were conquered with ease, and it left 2 legs against Oxford United, now a dangerous opponent and recent winners of the competition. Luton stood 3 games away from immortality.
Oh, Payton made an error of judgment there. This is Rob Johnson. Steen coming in. Oh, brilliant goal! With the left foot, it was. Oh, it's in!
This has gone there to watch him. Harford getting in on this one. Foster's in there too. The chance for Luton. Steen has scored. Check by him. Aston Villa. Thomas. Now Smith, the great chance out. Save! Superbly by Newell. Stumble. Could Black get in there? Steen! And it's in there!
Not only had Oxford been sunk in the semis, they'd been smashed 7-4 in the league before one of the greatest Wembley shocks in recent memory when George Graham's Arsenal got turned over under the shadow of the Twin Towers. After 103 long years, Luton Town had won a major trophy, and via the bodies of Hartlepool, Southampton, QPR and Portsmouth, another looked on the horizon. Wimbledon appeared in the FA Cup semi-final.
First goal of the season to make it 1-1. And he takes it.
Sadly, thanks to the ISIL disaster, European football wasn't an option as the Hatters ended the campaign with 4 successive 1-1 draws before going again strongly into the 88-89 campaign.
Williams with the kick. Here's Harford. The 6th of the chest of Harford.
Ray Harford was smart enough to notice his team's advancing ages and brave enough to get rid of a talisman as notable as Brian Stein before Mark Stein, Mal Donaghy and Andy Dibble joined him in leaving. Then the splurge began. Steve Williams from Arsenal acquired for a record 300 grand, quickly following into Kenilworth Road, Roy Wegerle, John Dreyer and Alec Chamberlain. Whilst it was another slow start to the season, both Leeds and Manchester City had been dumped out of the League Cup in advance of the quarter-final, which pitted Luton Town with Southampton in January. Southampton, who had been pumped 6-1 in the league, but they were a little more difficult to dispose of in the cup, the Hatters requiring a replay before West Ham were comparatively thrashed 5-0 across 2 legs in the semi-final. Nottingham Forest were the opponents at Wembley. Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest, but his powers were apparently on the wane and he hadn't won a trophy for nearly a decade.
So now, turning a good cross back in there again. Richards forward and Neil Webb is further forward than any of them. There's Webb. 6-yard boxes, Nigel Clough again. It's another one.
Picking up the pieces of a Wembley defeat, Ray Harford and his team were thankful for the renewed energy of new coach Terry Mancini. The Hatters eventually avoided the drop by 2 points before the club's financial mismanagement came into focus yet again. The squad was dismantled, the stadium sold and leased back as they struggled to keep their head afloat amid the new and relentless slosh of top-flight money. Spoiler, we're going to Scotland next, not for the first time, and to catch up on the tour of Britain we're doing, click on this playlist.